He read the invitation out loud to his assistant the morning it was printed, standing in the glass-walled corner office that Talia had helped him lease during the lean years, when his credit score was a number he never said aloud and his pitch deck was a PDF on a borrowed laptop. He read it with the careful, deliberate pleasure of a man who has rehearsed the moment in private many times before performing it in public. "Talia Drummond," he said, and then paused, the way a prosecutor pauses before delivering something he already knows will land. "I think she should be there to see this." His assistant, a young woman named Cassidy, who had learned very quickly that her job was to agree with things, nodded without looking up from her tablet. The card was cream-colored and heavy. The font was a serif that cost extra. The venue was the Hargrove Grand Ballroom on Peachtree, which had a 16-month waitlist and a deposit that required a separate wire transfer. Connor Walsh had chosen all of it with intention, the way he chose most things now. Not for beauty, but for the signal it sent, the story it told about how far he had come, and more importantly, how far he believed others had not. He had been married to Talia Drummond for 11 years. In the version he told at dinners and panels and investor roundtables, those 11 years were a footnote. A difficult chapter that ended when they grew in different directions. He said it smoothly, with just enough practiced regret to seem human, and people nodded and moved on. Nobody pressed. Nobody asked what directions, exactly, or who had done the growing. The truth, which Connor had not said aloud to anyone in 4 years, was simpler and less flattering. Talia had built the foundation, not metaphorically, literally. She had written the original financial model for Walsh Capital when it was still operating out of a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur. She had spent 3 years doing the unsexy, invisible work, managing vendor contracts, chasing receivables, sitting across from bankers who did not take her husband seriously, and finding ways quietly to make them. She had learned corporate law from YouTube tutorials and a library card because they could not afford a consultant. She had done this while also working full-time as an operations manager at a logistics firm in Sandy Springs. Leaving before 6 in the morning and coming home after 9 at night and still sitting down at the kitchen table to review whatever Connor had sent her that day. Connor had found someone younger at a conference in Austin. He had not told Talia directly. He had let the distance accumulate until she asked the question that ended things, and then he had confirmed it without apology, and then he had hired an attorney who made the process efficient and impersonal. He took the company. She took the condo they'd bought together in Midtown. The settlement was structured in a way that was technically legal and practically designed to leave her with as little leverage as possible. She had not fought it. That was the part that still lived in him like a splinter he couldn't find. She had signed the papers, shaken hands with his attorney, actually shaken hands, which no one did, and walked out of the building on a Tuesday afternoon without a scene or a statement or a single pointed thing said for the benefit of anyone watching. Connor had expected something. He wasn't sure what. Tears, maybe. Accusation. The kind of performance that would have made it easier to continue believing the story he was telling about who she was and what she deserved. She gave him nothing. She had moved to Atlanta's West Side, into a neighborhood that the papers were calling emerging, and that most of his new colleagues called something else when they thought no one was listening. She had started something. That was all the mutual acquaintances ever said. She started something. Connor had not asked follow-up questions. He had not wanted to know. That was his first mistake. The invitation reached Talia on a Wednesday. She was in a meeting with her CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Renata, going over the term sheet for a Series B acquisition that would expand Drummond Tech's logistics software into 4 new markets. Her phone was face down on the table, which was her rule, but she picked it up when the courier notification came through because she recognized the sender address. Still the same assistant network Connor had used when they were together. She read it once. Then she set the phone face down again. "Sorry," she said. "You were saying the earn-out clause needs restructuring?" Renata looked at her for a moment, just a moment, and then continued talking. After the meeting, Talia stood at the window of the 14th floor and looked out at the city. She had bought this building 2 years ago. 30,000 square feet in a neighborhood people had written off, which meant she had been able to get it at a price that made her CFO raise both eyebrows when she first proposed it. The office had floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. On a clear day, you could see Stone Mountain. On most days, you could see enough to remember why she had never left this city, even when it would have been easier to go somewhere that did not hold so many versions of her she was still in the process of outliving. She did not call Connor back. She called her assistant, a methodical young man named Ad, and told him to send a confirmation she would attend. When Ad asked, carefully, whether she wanted him to arrange transportation, she told him yes. The full arrangement. He knew what that meant. The woman Connor was marrying was named Brooke. She was 31, possessed of the particular confidence that comes from having been considered beautiful by the right people at the right age. And she worked in brand strategy at a firm that had consulted for Walsh Capital twice. She was not unkind. She was simply unaware of most of what she did not know, which is a different condition than cruelty and often produces similar results. On the morning of the wedding, Brooke asked Connor why he had invited his ex-wife. They were in the suite at the Hargrove, and she was standing in front of the mirror doing something that did not require his help, so she could afford to ask the question without looking at him. She deserves to see where things ended up, Connor said. He was adjusting his cufflinks, which were new and engraved. After everything. After everything meaning what? Meaning the divorce was her choice. She walked away from all of this. He gestured around the room, which was filled with orchids, and pressed linens and morning light filtered through gauze curtains. I want her to see what she walked away from. Brooke considered this. She was not the kind of woman who said everything she thought, which Connor had once found appealing, and was, on days like this one, beginning to find opaque. Okay, she said finally. You're not worried? He asked. About what? About her coming. Brooke looked at him in the mirror. Should I be? Connor laughed the way men laugh when they are more unsettled than they intend to show. No, he said. Absolutely not. The guests began arriving at 4. The ballroom had been dressed in white and gold, which Connor's event coordinator had described as aspirational without being aggressive. And there was a string quartet playing near the entrance that cost more per hour than Talia's first monthly salary. The groomsmen stood near the bar and told stories that were mostly about Connor, and mostly flattering, and occasionally punctuated by laughter that had the slightly hollow sound of laughter that knows it is being performed. One of them, a man named Barry, who had known Connor since their days at Georgia State, said something about Talia around the second round of drinks. Not maliciously, exactly, just in the way that men at weddings sometimes feel licensed to revisit old histories, as though the occasion confers a kind of retrospective permission. I always thought she was uptight, Barry said. Smart, obviously, but she never relaxed. The others nodded in the non-committal way of men who are not sure whether agreeing will cost them anything. She could never keep up with him, Barry added, not at this level. He gestured around the room, at the crystal and the flower in the Hargrove's famous marble floors, which reflected light in a way that made everyone look slightly more significant than they were. None of them had looked at the guest list carefully. None of them had noticed the confirmation that had come in from the Drummond group. She arrived at 4:40. There were 3 of them with her. Not large men in the theatrical sense. Not hired menace in ill-fitting suits. They were dressed well, in charcoal and dark navy, and they moved with the specific, unhurried efficiency of people who were very good at their jobs. They were her head of physical security and 2 of his team leads. And they were there because Talia had built a company that operated in 14 cities and managed sensitive data for clients in financial services and healthcare. And traveling without a security detail was something her board had asked her twice to stop doing. So she had stopped. She was wearing black. Not morning black, not defiant black, just the particular shade and cut that a woman wears when she has long since stopped dressing for other people's interpretations. The dress was well made and understated and fit her, the way clothes fit a person who has stopped thinking about clothes as performance. She wore one piece of jewelry, a thin gold watch on her left wrist that had belonged to her grandmother and that she wore everywhere, even in rooms like this one, especially in rooms like this one. The string quartet was between pieces when she walked in, so the sound her entrance made was mostly the sound of people turning to look and then deciding what to do with their faces. The woman in the green cocktail dress near the entrance, a corporate attorney who had been watching the room the way people in her profession tend to watch rooms, touched her companion's arm and said quietly, "Is that Talia Drummond? The tech CEO? The one from the Times piece last month? The logistics software? I thought she looked familiar." Connor saw her from across the room. He was standing with his event coordinator and a photographer and two people from the catering company, managing the small logistical emergencies that accumulate at the hour before a wedding ceremony. And he looked up because the quality of the room's attention had changed in a way that was almost physical. A collective shift in posture, a redistribution of where eyes were pointed. And there she was. He had expected something smaller. He was not sure what, exactly. He had imagined the version of her from 4 years ago. The woman who had walked out of the attorney's office without a scene, quiet and diminished looking in the way he had needed her to appear. The woman who had been, in his memory and in his retelling, an ending. She did not look like an ending. She looked like someone who had stopped waiting for his story about her to stop mattering, which is a different thing and harder to dismiss. He crossed the room. He did it the way he did most things now, with forward momentum, and the assumption that his approach would be received as welcome. He was halfway there when one of the men with her made a small adjustment in position, not blocking, not threatening, just present in a way that registered. Connor slowed without quite stopping. "Talia," he said. "Connor." Her voice was the same. That had always been one of her qualities. The voice that didn't change depending on who was in the room. He had found it reassuring when they were together, and had eventually found it irritating. And now, standing in the ballroom of the Hargrove in the suit he had chosen to make a specific point, he found it something else that he did not yet have a word for. "I'm glad you came," he said. "You invited me. I know." He smiled the smile that worked in boardrooms and on panels. "I wanted you to see all of this." She looked at him steadily. "I can see it," she said. "Doesn't it?" He stopped. He had prepared something for this moment, some version of what he wanted to say, some arrangement of words that would communicate what he needed her to understand. Standing in front of her, he found that the arrangement no longer fit. "You could have had this," he finished. It was not what he had meant to say, or not precisely, but it was close enough. Talia tilted her head slightly. "I did have it," she said. "I built it. You're just living in it." She said it without heat. That was the thing about it. She said it the way a person states a coordinate. "Here, this location, this is where we are." And then she turned away, and the man to her left shifted back to his original position, and she walked toward the reception tables with the unhurried ease of someone who had said what needed to be said and had nothing further to prove. The wedding ceremony happened. Vows were exchanged. Brooke cried at the right moments, and Connor did not, which guests would later describe in different ways depending on who they were. The ballroom looked beautiful. The photographs would look beautiful. These things were true and would remain true. What also happened in the hour between the ceremony and the dinner service? A woman named Sandra Kelleher, who was a financial journalist and had come as the +1 of a mutual college friend, recognized the name on the place card 2 tables over from where she was sitting. She had written a short item about the Drummond Group 8 months ago. A sidebar in a business quarterly about women-led tech companies in the Southeast. She pulled out her phone and searched the name, not for professional reasons, just because recognition had a momentum of its own. What came up was more than she had remembered. The company's most recent valuation, the federal contract, the partnership with 2 major hospital networks, the Times profile, the piece in Atlanta Business Chronicle, with the headline that used the word empire without irony. Sandra looked across the room to where Talia was seated, speaking quietly with the corporate attorney in the green dress. Then she looked at the head table, where Connor was adjusting his boutonniere and laughing at something Barry had said. She put her phone away. The trouble with the house of cards Connor Walsh had built was not that it was fragile. It was that he had built it in a room with a window he had not noticed was open. The SEC inquiry had been ongoing for 7 months by the time of the wedding. It concerned series of investment vehicles that Walsh Capital had structured between 2021 and 2023. Vehicles that had been designed very carefully to exist in the narrow space between aggressive and actionable. His attorney had assured him, more than once, that the space was wide enough. His attorney was good at assurance. It was less certain whether he was good at the other things. The documents had been subpoenaed 3 weeks before the wedding. Connor had not told Brooke. He had told himself he did not want to ruin the occasion, which was true enough to feel like a real reason. What he had not told anyone had, in fact, organized his internal life for 4 years around not examining, was that the financial modeling for those 2021 structures had been built on a foundation that Talia had created during their marriage. Not the structures themselves. She had nothing to do with what he had done with her work after she left. But the framework, the methodology, the particular approach to risk layering that had made those vehicles look as stable as they did, that had been hers, developed during the years when she was staying up past midnight at the kitchen table. And he had repurposed it. And then he had taken the company, and then he had taken the credit, and then he had sent her an invitation to his wedding so she could observe the results. He had believed, with the confidence of a man who had arranged his own story very carefully, that she did not know about the SEC matter. He had believed she was in Atlanta's West Side, doing something modest with something small. He had not kept up. The Drummond Group had been retained 6 months ago as a technology infrastructure vendor for a firm that was cooperating with the federal investigation. This was a fact. It was also a fact that Talia had said nothing about it to anyone, because it was not her business to say, and she had never been the kind of person who spoke without purpose. But the investigator who had reached out to Renata in late March asking technical questions about data architecture had mentioned once that the methodology in question looked familiar to them, that they had seen something like it before. Renata had made a note and said nothing. Connor did not know any of this at his wedding. He found out the way people usually find out things they have spent years not finding out. All at once, in front of other people, in a setting that made privacy impossible. The dinner had just been served when Barry leaned over to the man next to him. A tech investor from Charlotte who had been introduced to the Walsh Capital Network 3 years ago, and said something about the SEC matter. He said it quietly, but not quietly enough, and the table was arranged in the particular way that large round tables are arranged, which is to say that quiet things travel. The investor from Charlotte set down his fork. The woman in the green dress, 3 tables over, had spent 15 years in financial litigation. She heard the words SEC inquiry and Walsh Capital in proximity and filed the information the way her brain had been trained to file information. Quickly, without expression, for later use. Sandra Kelleher had not put her phone entirely away. The details moved through the room, the way details move through rooms where people are well-dressed and holding drinks and pretending not to be listening, faster than they appear to be moving, and to more people than anyone at the source would guess. Connor became aware of it by degrees, first in the quality of the conversations nearest the head table, which had developed the slightly over-deliberate quality of conversations that are performing normalcy. Then in the way his event coordinator, when he caught her eye across the room, looked at her phone instead of at him. Then in Barry's face, which was doing something complicated. He looked for Talia. She was seated at her table, her hands folded on the tablecloth in front of her, and she was listening to the woman in the green dress say something. Her face was what it had always been. Composed, attentive, giving away nothing she had not decided to give. She had not done this. He knew that, or knew it enough. She had simply been in the room, and the room had done what rooms do when the truth has been in them long enough, waiting. He stood up. He crossed the floor with the kind of speed that draws attention, which was the opposite of what the moment required. But Connor Walsh had spent 4 years building a self that moved toward things rather than away from them. And the instinct did not know how to distinguish between situations where this was useful. "What did you say to them?" he said. His voice was lower than he intended it to be. Talia looked up at him. "I haven't said anything." "Then, what did you, Connor?" Her voice was the same as it had always been, even now. "I didn't say anything. I came because you invited me. I sat down. I had the salmon." She paused. "Whatever is happening in this room is not something I caused." "You knew," he said. "You knew about the SEC." She held his eyes. "I knew about a lot of things. That's generally what happens when a person pays attention." The room had gone quiet in the way. Rooms go quiet when something is happening that everyone understands is significant, and no one wants to be the person who visibly acknowledged they were watching. "You could have warned me," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The gold watch caught the chandelier light briefly as she shifted in her chair. "I built the framework," she said. "You built what you built with it. Those are two different things, and the space between them is yours." She held his gaze. "I could not have warned you about yourself." He stood there. The string quartet, somewhere in the room, had begun to play again, not because it was appropriate, but because musicians sometimes do not know what else to do. Brooke had not moved from the head table. She was still seated, upright, her hands flat on the white linen, and she was watching her husband stand in the middle of the room and have a conversation that was making the shape of everything she had believed about her life slightly less stable than it had been an hour ago. Talia left before the cake was cut. She did not make an announcement. She did not take anything with her. She had not brought anything that required taking. She folded her napkin on the table with the particular neatness that had always been one of her habits, the small, reflexive ordering of space that had once made Connor call her rigid, and that she had eventually understood as something different. A person who understood that how you leave a room matters. Aid was waiting near the entrance with the car. One of the security team held the door. The night air outside the Hargrove was warm and heavy with the particular quality that Atlanta evenings have in late spring, that almost honeysuckle weight that clings to whatever it touches. She stood on the steps for a moment. The city was doing what cities do in the dark, continuing, indifferent, full of its own noise and motion. Somewhere to the east, a helicopter was moving across the sky. A couple in resort wear was climbing out of a rideshare, 2 doors down, laughing about something. The valet near the curb was on his phone. She had not come to the wedding to win anything. She had understood something, in the weeks between receiving the invitation and attending it, that she had not been able to articulate to anyone, but that had clarified for her in the way that certain things clarify when you stop asking them to be simpler than they are. Connor had not invited her to be cruel, exactly. He had invited her because he needed a witness for a story he had been telling himself about who was the victor in the thing that had happened between them. And she had come because she understood, finally, that the story was not hers to correct. It had always been going to correct itself. These things do. They just need time and an open room. She had not told the investigator anything. She had not planted anything, said anything, implied anything to anyone in that ballroom. She had eaten her salmon. She had talked to the attorney in the green dress about a construction project in Pittsburgh and a building she was considering there. She had folded her napkin and walked out. There was a small ceremony she had made for herself 2 years ago. After the last time, she had let herself read an old email from Connor's attorney and felt the old bile rise. She had written down, on a note card she still had, what she was going to build and how she was going to feel when it was built. She had put the notacard in the drawer of her grandmother's writing table, which was now in her office on the 14th floor, because the table was the only piece of furniture she had wanted from the marriage and had asked for and received. She had not looked at the notocard in 18 months. She did not need to. The car pulled around. Ad opened the door. She got in, and the car moved into the Atlanta night, and behind her the lights of the Hargrove Grand Ballroom burned the way lights burn when people inside them are still working out what everything means. She looked out the window and let the city move past her. Block after block, the old neighborhoods and the new ones, the places she had known when she had nothing, and the places she had made since. Her phone buzzed. A message from Renata. Series B call confirmed for Monday. Term sheet looks clean. Think we're in good shape. She read it. She typed back one word. Good. Then she turned the phone over in her lap and looked out the window at the city she had never left. And she let herself feel, just for a moment, the particular quiet of a woman who does not need anyone in that ballroom to understand what she built, or why she built it, or what it cost her, or what it became. She already knew. That was the thing about knowing. Nobody could take it from you, and you never had to explain it to a room that was not listening. The car moved on through the warm Atlanta night, and she let it.